And welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We are back after an extended hiatus. We did skip one episode. We're back to talk all about your Missouri basketball Tigers. I'm your host, Sam Snelling. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you have already subscribed, hit like, all that kind of stuff helps spread the word. And you will see to my right, Mr. Matt Watkins. Matt, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
I have very little to complain about at this point. It's nice having a bit of a quiet off season on the basketball side. It does kind of suck for us to try to figure out what the world we're going to talk about. But the benefit is we're not scrambling to try to, put a bunch of stuff together. We can plan, we can strategize, we can talk all about every little nook and cranny of the roster. I would like to sort of say probably keep an eye out for tomorrow. I will be putting word out that we can talk about the top 8. We do that every summer. Always like to get the people's idea on who will end up in the top 8, like looking back in retrospect to who we thought was going to be in the top 8 last year and who ended up in the top 8 and how all that worked out. So be on the lookout for that tomorrow. And apologize to anybody who was hoping to get an episode of this on July 3rd. I think holiday schedules just blew it all up. We just could never quite find a time to connect. So we apologize, but we are back. We're going to be going every couple weeks, probably from here until the season gets close, which for football is certainly right around the corner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Pig time.
And if you haven't heard, very soon there's a preview magazine dropping, Rock M Plus exclusive, 93 pages of Mizzou football preview. Like, pretty incredible. I've read some of the stuff. It's great. I haven't read the whole thing because it's a lot. And we're still putting out like content on the regular at Rock M Nation. So it's been a lot. So Watkins, you and I, we don't really have a lot to talk about. Last episode with Mr. Harris, he and I talked about wings. The previous episode, you and I talked about ball handlers. So I figure we'll just wrap this up and we'll talk about the post. Big guys. Right. The easiest way to kind of look at this is the fact that Missouri, for really the first time since Dennis Gates has been here, has more traditional centers on his roster than he's had. He's got guys with got a guy, we should say, with experience, and a couple other guys who certainly have potential, but they're all very tall and hopefully can rebound and block shots and affect things at the rim, something that has been a bit of a struggle for the Tigers the last couple of years. Certainly a hole in the defense as much as even offensively. I don't know how super technical we're going to be here because there is a limited number of bodies to talk about. If you want to know about, we could talk a little bit about small ball fives, but for the most part, we're going to be like figuring out what's going to be different with guys like Josh Gray, with Peyton Marshall. Will Trent Burns see the floor this year? I know that the staff certainly let's just start with Burns because, I don't want him to be like a forgotten guy here. I know the staff seems to like his potential. He's certainly got great size. What is he, 7'3"?
Thereabouts, yep.
Yeah, like really long. Plus. Yeah, long, tall, lanky. He could use some time in the weight room. But guys with that physical profile, there aren't many of them. And when you have the chance to kind of grab one, especially one that can kind of move and seems to have some level of touch like he has, like the potential to expand his shooting game, I think they like what he can provide, but it may be a while before we see a lot of that realized.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Had Mizzou not pivoted at the very end of their spring portal campaign and grabbed Josh Gray, there may have been a little bit more runway for Trent to get some playing time this year. But, they've got 15 guys who I would consider scholarship level players. And you're not going to play 15 guys, at least not regularly. The math just doesn't work out, especially when you've got guys like, Mark Mitchell and Tony Perkins up at the top who are going to be playing 25, 30 minutes a game. There's just not enough minutes left for a guy like Trent Burns to come in and have any sort of significant playing time. That's not to say he won't play. It's not to say we couldn't be surprised when he jumps up a little bit. But last time I was on the podcast, we talked about T.O. Barrett, and I kind of look at him in the same way. It's not only a matter of total volume of bodies, but bodies in front of him. And unlike Barrett with the posts, you've got two guys who probably don't command as much time, but you also have the prospect of maybe not playing a traditional post for stretches in a game. So, that's kind of where the minutes crunch, at least to me, comes in.
Yeah, I think the likelihood that we're going to see some more traditional fives, playing is obviously increased just by who they went out and signed. You look at Josh Gray, and we have a body of work to know what you can expect from Josh Gray. You bring in Peyton Marshall, who physically seems to be a little bit more ready, at least on the strength side. So really Marshall and Gray, without saying that they're identical, profile in a very similar way of like what you're going to get from them when they're on the floor.
Right.
And if you're going to give up sort of the physicality of that spot, do you want to go with a guy that has great size like Burns, or do you want to, go with somebody who maybe has a little bit more reliability on the offensive end? And I think when you're talking about small ball lineups, like that's kind of the goal of a small ball lineup, is to make yourself more efficient offensively. And so you're going to look at, like guys like, Aiden Shaw, who can, who still kind of has the, the attack of verticality that he has through his athleticism. But a guy who is going to space and cut, certainly not going to space and shoot, but we don't know. Maybe. It could happen. It could happen this year. It certainly didn't last year.
He actually has to shoot the ball. I think he's got the ability to, but you actually have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually have to catch, square, and release. But yeah, like I think if you're talking about small ball lineups, like you are probably going to play at least a portion, with a smaller lineup. And if you're doing that, then it doesn't really leave a whole lot more minutes to fit in a guy with the physical profile of Trent Burns. Like I said, I think longer term, and I think the staff has been upfront with them about it. So I think that's always kind of been the goal. Is like we're gonna build this trajectory with you. It might be a little tight at first, but hopefully he sticks with it. But I definitely think that when it comes, when we're talking about the 5 spot, we're really going to be talking about like the impact of 2 guys. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously it's going to be Josh Gray. It's going to be Peyton Marshall. Peyton Marshall has been featured in some of the newcomer series. I know they're series that you like, that I like. I mean, anytime you can get actual, any kind of like photo video stuff from workouts, it's always a good thing. Being able to kind of see guys and all that kind of stuff. But Marshall to me profiles, at least seems like a guy that profiles to see the floor, and at least based upon the conversations that some of us have had with people that are close to the program, that seems to at least be, the early indicators is that Marshall is maybe not going to like usurp a starting position, but he's certainly going to see the floor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You touched on it earlier that Josh Gray and Peyton Marshall are similar in a lot of respects, and they're not identical players, but having that 1-2 punch of similar type player makes it easy to figure out what you're going to do with those guys on the floor. That's not to say that you can't play with a 5-man on the floor. It's not to say that you can necessarily. It's just it's different when you've got a guy or two guys in this case that are more adept at scoring with their size and physicality around the rim versus stretching out to the 3-point line like a Connor Vanover last year. So you kind of want to build schemes or your system around the concept of having that type of guy on the floor. And if you've got two of them and one of them's playing well, one of them's not, one of them is produced more over the course of the season, one hasn't as much, you've got options versus just having one guy that you're relying on to be that guy. But that being said, Josh Gray has been a role player his entire career. Peyton Marshall is a freshman, albeit a pretty promising freshman. So there's a lot of questions about how much they're going to lean on having that guy on the floor at all. But I would say that Josh Gray probably has the edge in minutes early on just because we know what he's capable of. It's pretty good. It's pretty reliable, even though it's not a high usage, high minutes situation. Whereas I think Peyton Marshall is more of the wild card in the scenario. He could be not even on that plane, or he could be much above it. We don't know. My guess would be similar, maybe a little bit behind Josh Gray in minutes, but that's one of the things we watch in this fall. So, I would suspect both of those guys kind of skew towards the back end of the rotation, but where within that part of the rotation, it's unknown at this point.
Yeah, and I would also like to kind of bring up, like one of the things that we know that Missouri has sort of admitted by this point that they've gotten their brains beat in on the glass. Mm-hmm. And some of these additions have at least sort of pointed to them admitting that they can't really live that way in the SEC night in and night out. I don't think if you're able to maintain a level of offensive efficiency, I don't think you have to win the rebounding battle on an every night basis. Not in this league. It's hard to do, but you have to be competitive. And I feel like adding guys with bodies like this, like Gray is 260, Marshall, I think is down to 285 or something.
They're big boys.
Yeah. They're big, strong guys. And Marshall might be down more than that. I know at one point he was up around 330, mm-hmm. And has certainly changed his body a lot in the last year or so. So that's promising. But really, both those guys are big, physical, interior guys. That also changes what you do and have been doing a lot offensively, and changes some of the focal points of where you're going to attack the floor. Because, Josh Gray is not a guy that's going to space. He's not going to draw defenders away from the rim. Peyton Marshall, he's taken threes. I don't know that you'd consider him a shooter at this point. And, maybe that progresses, but year one, I certainly don't think you're expecting, Marshall to kind of step in on the floor and hit 40% of his 3-point shots. So both guys are very likely to, have a more stationary role around the basket. And that certainly impacts a lot of the things that Dennis Gates likes to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And on your point on rebounding, I actually saw something that I couldn't have agreed with more recently. And the comment was that dominating the defensive boards isn't really conducive to winning or losing. It's not a big factor. But getting destroyed on the boards is a sure loss. And when you think of it that way, you have to hold your own. Being able to rebound every missed shot isn't necessarily vital. But the way Mizzou's rebounded the last 2 years, that has cost them a lot of points and probably a few victories along the way. I really can't say that so much 2 years ago because their defeats were typically so lopsided. There weren't really any close losses. So I won't say that they lost any games because of that. but those lopsided defeats could have been close losses or maybe even wins, I guess, if you really stretch, had they been able to maintain some sort of semblance of defensive rebounding. So having those two guys, at least having that option, is big to me. If you're late in the game and you're up 10 points and there's a guy, they're just feeding the post, like that happened several times last year. I believe it was Georgia and maybe Florida. They just discovered that they could push Mizzou around on the block and they just kept throwing it in, and Mizzou had no answer to that. This year they do. But are you really that much better with them on the floor versus your other options, over the course of 40 minutes? We'll see.
Well, and as we've also pointed out, even in the previous two series of this position, like playing small ball doesn't mean that you're all small either.
Mm-hmm.
It did kind of mean that the last couple of years, because you had Nick Honor, who's small, and Sean East. A lot of those guys, if they're on the floor at the same time, you're small. But when you swap out that with, Tony Perkins, and your two guard, whoever that might be, if it ends up being Marquez, or it ends up being Tamar,
Mm-hmm.
guys who are experienced. But then you also look at, okay, if we're bringing in Mark Mitchell, who'd be playing a lot at the 3 or the 4 spot, that's 6'9". This guy can rebound. Realistically, Missouri really hasn't had a guy like that.
Mm-hmm.
No offense to Aiden Shaw. But having somebody who is known to be a good rebounder, it's I think that's one of the things that they've tried to unlock with Shaw is you're an otherworldly athlete, just go get the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, rebounding is, can be very instinctual, and some guys are good rebounders and some guys aren't good rebounders. And Missouri largely has not had good rebounders. And now they kind of do. That's the thing. And so, you would expect just being better 1 through 4 will help whether or not you have anybody good at the 5. And so I think being good 1 through 4 should make them far more competitive, even if Gray or Marshall are not on the floor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you could conceive a lineup of Tony Perkins, good rebounder for a guard; Caleb Grill, great rebounder for a guard; Jacob Cruz rebounded well last year; Mark Mitchell, great rebounder; and then Aiden Shaw. That's a small ball lineup, but they all rebound well. So I always look at rebounding as a skill. It's perhaps a little bit more of a intuitive and a grit skill than other things, but it's still a skill nonetheless. Even if you have great height, great athleticism, and you have no concept of what you're doing on the glass, you're not going to be a good rebounder. You'll hold your own, but it's really more of a skill to me, and one that Mizzou just hasn't had. You watch the guys try and rebound, and it's just this isn't a good rebounding skill team. They're not reading the ball off the rim well. They're not going and getting it. They're not boxing out when it's appropriate, going to get the ball. They're tipping it around. It's not been a good thing. So,
well, I think one a good example of Anderson Garcia
mm-hmm.
is not the world's best athlete. He's a good athlete, but he's what, 6'7"?
I think he might be 6'8", but yeah, points remains.
For anybody who doesn't know the name off the top of their head, he's a reserve. I mean, he came off the bench last year for Texas A&M. He's the guy who's been at A&M now for 3 years. He started at Mississippi State. And he's a guy that just rebounds the hell out of the ball. I mean, you play that guy, 18, 20 minutes a game. He's probably, if he's not getting his hands directly on the ball, he's tipping it to teammates. So, his instincts, his his ability to read the ball is, it's Rodman-esque. Mm-hmm. And it's another great example. Rodman, another guy's 6'7", 6'8", just a great rebounder. You don't need to be a monster to be a great rebounder.
Well, and Dennis Rodman told us that it was a skill, and he even described it to us on screen, where it's, the ball going all over, and this is how he'd read it. I don't know, when he was doing his Last Dance documentary.
His Rodman thing.
And he was trying to relay to the viewers how he rebounded, and it was total nonsense. But, he practiced it. He would go out and have guys miss shots, and he would watch the ball come off the rim, and he would get in the right spot. It's a skill. He practiced it. It's not like Dennis Rodman was born and all of a sudden he was the greatest rebounder ever. It's something that he worked on, and that's, you take ownership of it, you work on it, and it becomes something that you can do well. And I think Anderson Garcia, while not at that level, is that same type of guy.
So I think, that is our way of kind of saying that I do think that Marshall and Gray will help them rebound. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it is like the biggest part of Missouri becoming a better team rebounding, or better rebounding team, I should say. We got a border collie shaking over there.
Yeah, she's I think
dog appearance. There's the shake. We're good. Well, yeah. So, but I did kind of want to touch on like the offensive side, because mm-hmm. one of the things, and if you haven't already, and you're listening to this podcast, you haven't read, Matt Harris had a really nice in-depth kind of scout on Peyton Marshall, talking about the impact of the Missouri offense and how that was sort of passed down to his coaches, when he was an overtime elite, and and giving the coaches the kinds of things that they were going to be asking Marshall to do, so he'll be more ready. Being able to sort of be a, high screen and roll kind of guy, a dribble handoff guy, a guy who is going to play out by the 3-point line, but is still probably going to be, trailing a driver and looking for dump offs versus looking for kickouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember, excuse me, how long ago it was, but or which podcast, but I remember listening to one where Dennis Gates was a guest, and they were talking with him about, like players or coaches that he thought were instrumental to developing his identity as a coach. And he mentioned Ardias Sabonis from way back when, the elite big man, but perhaps one of the first modern big men that came along in basketball. He was a great player, could score in the low post, could do everything, but his passing ability is what set him apart. And I think that's kind of what Dennis Gates conceptualizes as his 5. And now it's in vogue. You have a guy like Nikola Jokic, who's exactly that. But when you see a guy like Peyton Marshall, he wasn't really doing that in high school. They talked to his coaches at Overtime Elite. They got him out on the elbows a little bit, working reads, working passes, being able to be more versatile. And I think that's kind of the next step for Peyton Marshall. We're pretty confident that he can use his body to be a fairly efficient player as a freshman on the low block. But if that's all he can do, that kind of hems in your offense as to what you can do. Whereas if you can bring him out and correspondingly bring out his defender, just as importantly, that opens up the lane for all manner of offense attacking the rim from his teammates. So, I think that progression will be big. Whether he's able to be up for it his first year, we'll see. It's good that he was working on that last year in a fairly competitive environment. So, I think that's really the biggest question that I have, is how quickly that his ability to step out and be an offensive, not creator, but I guess Matt Harris likes using the word connector, someone who can at least move the ball away from the basket and be proficient at doing
that. So let's do this as we kind of wrap up the discussion on the 5 spot. I'm going to set an over/under on minutes played, and for Josh Gray, I'm going to set it 17.5.
17.5 a night.
So you're going to take the over, or you take the under?
Assuming, and you can never do this, but assuming everyone is healthy, I'm going to take the under on that.
Okay. I might be able to get tucked into taking the over. Like, it wouldn't surprise me to see him at like 18, 19. I don't think he's going to regularly play 20 minutes or more.
I'm hammering the under on it. Just
yeah. Well, and that's also like, is he playing 22, 24 in SEC play? Does that mean he's probably playing 10, 12 minutes a night against, Mississippi Valley State.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, Peyton Marshall. 10.5.
I think that's a better number of the two, but I still might lean under on that.
Yeah, still might take the under?
Still might take the under. I would lean under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's probably going to be 9-10 minutes.
But that's a competitive wager there. I think the 10.5 is a good. If he's hitting that, he's having a you like what you're getting out of him. Whereas if he's below that, it could be more of a mixed bag, which I think is what Mizzou's going to get. But who knows? You never know. One of them very well could go over, but I would very, very much bet that if one of them went over, the other one is under, and perhaps significantly under.
Yeah. So, that's still less than 30 minutes, right? So you're still looking at 10 minutes. So that does make me want to, ask the last question, which, where we're asking Trent Burns, will Trent Burns catch a red shirt?
That's a really tough question. I think I'm not going to say if I was in charge, I would do it, but I think at this point it might be beneficial. But whether he does, I would say no. And that's just because I know how much the coaching staff likes to see the end of the bench early on in non-conference play. I think it was last year, some of the guys we weren't expecting to see much of, if not at all, were some of the first guys off the bench in some of the early warm-up games. And by warm-up, I mean games Mizzou should win, and they lost one of them. But, in those games against the pretty supposedly non-competitive teams, I was surprised to see some of those guys that I didn't expect to see a whole lot, and ended up not seeing a whole lot through the course of the year, coming on the court first. So, I think I would say no, but I'm not confident in that.
So I would, I look at it like this. If you think that, you're going to have Trent Burns for 5 years, then it makes sense to redshirt him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is also a discussion that you have to have with him and his family. Exactly. and kind of go over it. But the reason that a player leaves your program is, pro, transfer, graduation, right? At this point, we don't know what his pro future looks like. I would be willing to say that I am probably not going to redshirt him, because I don't think the likelihood that a guy stays on your roster for 5 years in this day and age is very high. So what is a redshirt really doing for him? If there are moments in a game where even if you're going to play 4 or 5 minutes, that can help him, keep him engaged, go about it that way. But the likelihood that you're going to have a 23-year-old Trent Burns on the roster of Missouri in 5 years is low.
It is.
And so I look at it like that. Even though you may believe that he has pro potential, I think your trajectory on that should be a little bit faster, and it should probably be 3 to 4 years is what you're looking to, get him in and out of your program within that time frame. And if it's outside that time frame, then you need to reevaluate your development.
Yeah, I would say I would 100% agree with that from the program perspective, but from the player perspective, I can see him being a little bit more open to that if he knows he's not going to be playing many minutes, if at all. Because that gives him another year of college runway to either play play somewhere else. And, last year, Dennis Gates, and this was a little bit more of an injury situation than simply just deciding to redshirt a guy, but both Caleb Grill and especially John Tonje were interesting case scenarios where Dennis Gates was sure not to play them at a point in the season where they would have burned their eligibility for a medical redshirt. And guess what? John Tonje isn't playing at Mizzou next year. It didn't help Mizzou at all to do that, but Dennis Gates, whether he had the conversation with John Tonje or just did it on his own volition, did allow him the opportunity to play again another year, where they probably could have got him out on the court and, tried to see what they could get out of him down the stretch and maybe win a game. I don't think it was in the program's best interest with John Tonje to sit out the entire year last year. I mean, his injury was preseason and he played at various points throughout the season. So I think it was, if not as much, perhaps more for his benefit, the player's benefit, to preserve that year of eligibility. So, those are kind of the two competing points on that.
Yeah, I would only couple that by saying that I don't view John Tonje as a guy who is ever going to play in the NBA.
Okay. Fair.
And Trent Burns, while I have no idea if he has that potential right now, but he certainly has more potential to play in the NBA than John Tonje does, because he's 7'3", and if he can learn the skill of shooting and be a decent shooter, then I think that's a guy that can at least play some, because there's just not a lot of 7'3" dudes floating around.
Am I hearing some Greg Gard slander over there?
Not intentional. But I love that you pulled that out no matter what. Like it's consistent.
John Tonje will be playing at Wisconsin this year, for those who are unaware, and I am a very big Badger fan.
Yes. If by Badger fan you mean Badger hater. Let's turn the page on this 5-spot talk and see if we can actually get in some Rock'em Plus plugs. Because boom, look at this banner. Subscribe at Rock'em Plus at rock'em.plus, because we're going to talk about one of your summer projects, something that I feel like I handed this off to you thinking that it was going to be something that would take you all the way through, like, pick at it here and there. Maybe if you get to September, we have something we can cobble together. Great. And here it is. Like, you turned it out in like 2 weeks. But you went through and you actually you put together projections, as you've always done with Mizzou players. You put them together for all the incoming SEC transfers, which, if anybody who's followed my experience series this summer knows that there's 79 incoming transfers.
Hopefully that's it.
Yeah,
I don't want any more at this point.
There's still time. But yeah, so you had 79 players to go through using your little algorithms that you have, coupling with Evan Mia, and you put together projections for all 79 players. I'm impressed. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, it was, I put together projections for Mizzou's team in a little bit different manner. That is more kind of like trying to optimize things, where this is trying to take more of a realistic point of view at it. And the 79 players wasn't really the burr in my saddle, as it were, as far as workload. It was the 493 transfers that I reviewed over the last 2 years that came into high major programs. Having to go enter data on that was cumbersome. But once I had that and divided up among high major to high major transfers and low major to high major transfers, it became a lot easier. But basically what I was looking to do is get a good sample, which 500 is pretty solid, of prior players and how their transition year into their new program went. So in other words, Mark Mitchell's a good example this year. He's coming from a high major program at Duke. He's coming to Mizzou. How will his performance this year translate? That's what I was looking to answer. So in the process of doing this, I managed to find for every SEC player a minimum of 15 comparison players that most closely resembled their statistical profile at their prior schools. And I looked at how those 10 to 15 players performed their first year at their new high major school and created an average player that was basically the same as the player that we're looking at. In this case, Mark Mitchell, for example. There were a few guys, Mark Mitchell included, that didn't really have great comparisons because they're very unique to hit the transfer portal. Former five-star guy who's probably a jump shot away from being a first-round NBA draft pick is not something that you're really expecting to get in the spring. That's uncommon. But a guy like Marquez Warwick, there's a lot of guys that share his similar statistical profile. So you're able to build a pretty good comparison pool and then to see how they perform in their first year, moving from a low major to a high major. And that's how I've done it. And I ranked every one of them based on my projections. And as you mentioned, Evan Maya's BPR, which is a great tool, and then projected minutes played. So, I ranked all 79. I ranked all the teams based on their transfer classes, and it was an interesting project. You really got to see which teams struggled this spring in South Carolina and Oklahoma.
Yeah,
not so well. But some other teams that you might not expect, and I was throwing some shade on social media about this the other day, but Vanderbilt, I saw one prognosticator who I believe shares a southern border with us and probably not much else that we share. He projected Vanderbilt to go 1-17, and I think Vanderbilt may very well have the best transfer class in the conference. I'm not saying they're going to be number one, but 1-17 is, you haven't looked at the transfer hall if you're picking that. So
you ran the numbers, and they have 4 of the top 20 guys, and I mean, like, we really like what Missouri have. They have 2 of the top 10.
2 of the top 6, if I remember right.
Yes, Mark Mitchell is 6th.
Tony and we Perkins will not share first. Where. Okay, you did.
Yeah. No, like I think there's enough value for people that if you're already a subscriber, you've already seen these numbers. If you're not a subscriber, like there's plenty of value on the boards of what you guys are doing. But having number 1, number 6, but then the next closest guy is 36, and so like seeing what Vanderbilt's done, and so like this is what is tough about it is there really aren't, like you said, a lot of guys like Mark Mitchell. If you were to like wipe the board clean and just throw out the entire list of SEC transfers, like where would Mark Mitchell rank on your list of guys you would want to sign to your team? I mean, and I'm looking at the guys at the top. I'm not sure I see anybody who I would rather have over Mark Mitchell. Just based upon now the fit with Missouri. Yeah, like Tony Perkins makes a lot of sense for what they need and what he can provide. But I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a guy with as much value as what you can get from a talent like Mitchell.
Well, not only that, but he's one of the few players at the top of the list, or towards the top, that have multiple years to go. A lot of the guys like Tony Perkins and AJ Hogard, however you pronounce it, from Michigan State into Vanderbilt, another great player, has 1 year left. Jonas Adu, same thing. Those types of guys are really good, but they're out of eligibility after 1 year. This is a 1 year deal. If things go really well, I think Mark Mitchell could be a 1 year deal as well. But you at least have the option of a second year, which, it's MLB trade deadline time and player control. How many years you have left of eligibility, that's a big thing. You want those guys that have the ability to do it right now, but having the ability to do it not only now, but next year is big. And few players offer that like Mark Mitchell does.
What other groups kind of surprised you?
As far as the transfer classes?
Yeah, good or bad?
I don't know that I was surprised, but South Carolina was it. I don't want to talk bad about it because I still think they might be okay with what they have coming back. They've got at least Colin Murray-Boyles, who's a very good player, but I just don't know what they were doing.
Well, and Murray-Boyles is a guy who certainly looks primed to take a big jump.
Right.
I mean, the way that he went from, halfway through the season to the end of the season, if he kind of continues that trajectory, like he could be or should be an all-league player.
Sure. And so while there's always the consideration of what you have, I tried to look at that at least when formulating my second set of rankings, which were further on down the thread about how well they filled in gaps and how good the players were that they were filling those gaps in with. And I just think South Carolina is losing a lot. They didn't have enough coming back, and the guys that they brought in, they only brought in 3 players. And Jordan Butler, I'm high on as a prospect, but they're going to need him to be more than what he was last year, and they need a lot more. Nick Pringle, good player. I don't know if he's more than a role player. Who is the other player? The Norfolk transfer, Taylor, is that it? Do I even have that on there?
Thomas.
Thomas. I like him as a player, but again, you're relying on a guy who was playing at a mid-major last year to be your best transfer and a very big focal point of your offense. I look at him as a pretty similar player to Marquez Warwick. And, if you weren't bringing in a Tony Mitchell, you weren't bringing in a Mark Mitchell, Tony Perkins, didn't have Tamar Bates coming back, and you were looking at Warwick being up there with a guy like Colin Murray Boyles, you might be stretching as far as what you're trying to do. But enough about South Carolina. Oklahoma, they got decimated in the transfer portal. 3 or 4 of their best players left. They brought in a few guys I like. Duke Miles at High Point. I was high on him this spring. I think he's a very good player, but they brought in a class that is average at best, maybe a little bit below average, and all of those guys are going to have to immediately slot in the rotation. So I just don't know. That it's a tough gig. It's going to be a tough year for Moser down at OU. It might be his last year there. They're entering a new league, which, unlike football, isn't the worst thing in basketball. That the Big 12 was every bit as good, if not better, than the SEC. So he might actually have a little bit easier of a road.
Big 12 is better. It's okay.
We'll leave that up to the folks out there, but it's not the difference between SEC football and Big 12 football. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
LSU, I actually don't mind the guys that they brought in. They just brought in 3. I was thinking they might bring in 5 or 6, and it's just like.
I don't love that they added Cam Carter. Like that's
a player, but.
Like, is he a guy that really contributes to winning? I mean, he's a mostly inefficient offensive scorer. He's a solid defender. Mm-hmm. I think like you look at a class like LSU, you have to assume that, they're probably going to expect Jordan Sears to kind of do some things, but they're also hoping that some of their younger guys take some steps forward. I think, Tyrell Ward and, what was the big guy? Terrell or something. No, I'm.
I need the list in front of me to know.
I'm brain farting. But the point stands. I think they have some good young talent. I think they're hoping those guys kind of take a step forward, and they have Curtis Givens also kind of coming in, who I think is a 4-star point guard, a guy who I liked a lot as a high school player. I don't think he quite took the step some people thought he might, but a solid guy nonetheless. I mean, we don't have to go all up and down the SEC, but
those are some classes that I'm a little worried about. Auburn was underwhelming, but they have a fair amount coming back. I think they have a net loss in their backcourt, losing Trey Donaldson and Aiden Holloway in state. And the guys they brought in are good, but I don't know that they're any better than the guys they lost. So that's kind of moving chairs around. Some of the classes I liked, Tennessee, they're not rated particularly high in my rankings, but I thought they did a really good job of bringing in guys that are going to help them score, which is always a problem for Tennessee. I don't care who's coming in next year. Rick Barnes, you can basically write his name in ink for a top 20 defense, most likely top 10. It's just something that he's going to have. But what they've struggled with is scoring and especially shooting. Dalton Knecht helped with that big time last year, but they brought in a few up transfers. and Darlinstone Dubar, which I think is one of Matt Harris's favorite guys, and Igor Milicic from Charlotte, both good shooters. That'll help them immensely. Ches Lanier from Northern Florida, another good shooter. And then, of course, he couldn't help himself. He went out and got Felix Okpara from Ohio State, who is not an offensive threat, but he's a defensive phenom inside. So although they're not at the top of the class, they're a really good mid-class that checked all the boxes that they needed to do.
Yeah, I think Okpara at least kind of slots in to replace what I do. He's probably not quite the offensive player that I do. I didn't really think I do was a great offensive player either. Like, I would consider him an adequate offensive player.
They're a little bit different offensive players, but they're there for defense.
Yeah. So, but Lanier, I don't think Lanier is like a 1-for-1 replacement for our boy Dalton. But I think what you get with Lanier and Dubar is you do get guys who can shoot.
Mm-hmm. They shoot it well.
Yeah, and Milicic does for the most part as well. So
he's also a big man, So if he's 6'10", and if he's hitting 35%, that's a dynamite addition.
Yeah.
So
that's a dynamite addition for Rick Barnes to have a guy who can shoot 35%, right?
Yep. So that's one of the middle classes I like. Up towards the top, I'm a Byron Vandy. I'm thoroughly intrigued with them. I'm not saying they're going to win the conference, but
they have a really, like, their roster is, interesting.
It is. They don't
because
really have
you turned over a lot.
Yeah. But they have size everywhere else. It's an interesting thing. They don't really project to shoot it that well, but they've got a lot of scorers. It's one of those teams that I could see them finishing anywhere from 13th, 14th to 4th. It's just, when you bring in 9 transfers,
might be pushing it for me.
I'm just making the point. There's a lot of ground in there that they could finish in, and it's all about how you bring in 9 transfers, few returners, if any. I don't even remember.
They're all good transfers,
right? It can be a good team if they all gel together. If they don't, it's going to be a disaster. Not 1 in 17. That's silly. But they could be a surprise team. I think they're going to be a team that if those pieces come together, you're going to look back and be like, wow, we vastly underrated Vanderbilt.
I think they're one of the 10 best, at least one of the 10 best rosters in the league.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that.
And like, when you just talk about like talent level on the roster, like that's saying something. And then if Byington can kind of get the buy-in,
tons of it,
right? Byington, if he can get that, like, they play smaller, they'll play fast. They did the kind of James Madison. I could really see that working out, and them, maybe getting to like 6-7 land in the conference, and being sort of like a safe NCAA tournament team. Like, that wouldn't shock me at all.
Not at all.
For anybody that hasn't been paying attention, they got on top of Hogard from Michigan State, they got Chris Mannon from Cornell, who I like a lot. They got Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins from Virginia Tech. Yeah, Nickel's a really nice shooter. Jason Edwards is a nice playmaking point guard from North Texas. Devin McLaughlin is a combo forwardy type guy from Boston College. They got Kajani Wright, who certainly has talent if he can get unlocked at the post out of USC. And they got Jaquelin Roberts back, who I actually like as a prospect. Like, maybe I'll take some crap for kind of being a Stack guy, but I think Stack could evaluate talent. I think, like, Stack certainly struggled and keeping his roster kind of consistent and all that kind of stuff. But like, I think JQ Roberts is a nice looking player, and you give that guy a couple years in the same system, I think he could be really good keep, I guess you would say, for Byington.
Yeah, I would just my impressions on their rosters. They immediately, with their transfer class, have leapfrogged out of the bottom 25% of the league. And some of the other teams with their transfer hauls have kind of moved into that territory.
How you feel about Mike White?
He brought in a lot of guys. All of them are kind of I feel like I'm always ripping on Mike White, and I really don't mean to. He's a solid basketball coach. He is, when you think of like wins above replacement in baseball, he is replacement. You know, he's not bad. He's not good. He's just always there. You know, and coaching college basketball is hard. He's not been fired, which is a big plus. He may have been going to be fired at Florida, but you know, the fact that you're still around and doing this, 10, 15 years after you started, means you're a solid coach. We can agree on that. But the guys he brought in are just like, yeah, this guy could be decent. This guy could be decent. This guy could be decent. And that's what their entire class is. And it's like, you know, when you
brought in 2 wings from Mount St. Mary's.
Yeah. It's just like they're good players, but you know, I like some of the freshmen that he's brought in. He's got a really good freshman class coming in this year. I like Damari coming back, and what's the Blue Cane?
Demery. I think it's Demery.
Yeah, I know it's Blue Cane because I always think of Blue Buffalo when I hear that name for whatever reason. But you know, those are some good rising sophomores that he's got coming in. I think they can be a really solid team. It's just when I look at the transfer class, I think they're plugging gaps, and they kind of missed a shot to kind of elevate themselves into being a real competitor. You know, I think some of the freshmen may help with that, but yeah, I mean, I like Justin Abson. He's a Appalachian State transfer who's a kind of like an Aiden Shaw, but more progressed defensively. You know, they've got some good pieces. I just don't know that it's enough to get them out of the Mike White zone, which is in the middle or a little bit below record-wise.
Like the back half. Yeah. Like it's
like somewhere now, I guess, between like 9th and 12th, 8th and 12th, somewhere in there. And that's kind of where I see them based on that class. You know, Lawrence from Vandy could be a good pickup, but he didn't really play that well last year. If he pops, they could climb up. You know, it's hard to see them with so many competitive teams and so many competitive transfer classes coming in, really making a big move.
Yep.
So that's my thought on Mike White. As exciting as the name.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap this up. We have talked for over 50 minutes somehow in this off season with not a lot going on. Recruiting stuff, I would just say, like, you know, there's not a lot happening. Missouri's not looking at adding a huge class. So that's probably part of the reason why. If you want full details, I'd suggest subscribing to I put up the wrong thing. That says 573s.com. You can go buy t-shirts at 573s.com. If you go to /collections/rock-m, I believe our t-shirts are still there. There's a couple t-shirts you can purchase. And there's even a code on the forums to get your $5 off on any Rock M t-shirt. This is what I was going to talk about at Rock M Plus, because Matt Harris has been dropping all kinds of little recruiting nuggets and what we can expect of the class. He had some information on some of the recent guys who have been caught the eye of the staff, as well as guys who caught the eye of the staff a long time ago and may still be priorities. So I would recommend logging on and checking those guys out if you're not subscribed. Now is going to be a good time because really, like, soon. I don't really have the exact date. All I know is soon. Levi is putting the finishing touches on the magazine. The magazine's coming out. It is going to be $15 for a digital 93-page copy of the football magazine. It's really good. If you are a monthly subscriber, you get $5 off. If you are an annual subscriber, you get $10 off. So all the more reason to sign up for Rock M Plus is cash in on those discounts. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here, Mr. Watkins?
No, I would just say that, you know, if you've got a $15 thing that you want, and I would want this, even though I'm not a big football guy, but this will help me become a football guy, and you're willing to pay $15 for it, why would you not get the subscription for a month, try it out for $5, and pay the $10 for the magazine, and be coming out at the end with the same amount of money spent.
It's because guess what? Somebody thought about that with marketing.
You're getting the magazine and a subscription for the same price. So yeah, I mean, I would totally do that, and that comes from a guy who crunches numbers. It's efficient to do so.
And I would add, if you are already subscribed, we appreciate you. That's why we're giving you basically like a free month of the service. So all that. Head over to rockm.plus and you can kind of catch additional details on the magazine. When we should have a release date here soon, hopefully before the end of the week. A release date will be announced before the end of the week, I should say, not the magazine's coming out. And we'll keep everybody on top. You can follow at RockM Plus on Twitter for all those updates. Watkins is the guy kind of handling all that stuff. So
sometimes
if there are bad tweets, then you can usually point them at
those are mine. Yeah.
Thank you everybody for tuning in. We will be back in 2 weeks with more dive cuts, and I believe we will have an update on maybe some players and whatnot, because I think that the three of us might be going on a little field trip. So how's that for a teaser? Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care.